an area where legislators would come in and advise. For us to put it in layman's language, what does it mean for us to actually increase the debt ceiling?
Parliament has been given power by the law to set what we call the limit of what government can borrow. Government borrows from 3 potential sources. Number 1, domestically. Domestically borrowing means it will issue either what we call treasury bills or treasury bonds. People will buy them. Once they mature, they'll be given their money together with their interest. Bills mature faster. Bonds, they take longer time to mature. Then we have what we call external borrowing. That can either be bilateral, that is, for instance, Kenya taking loan from China, from Japan, or multilateral borrowing. Multilateral borrowing, you mean you are borrowing from a place, let's say, like World Bank, which is an entity that is comprised of various nations, or what we call IMF. IMF does not give what we call developmental lending. It only supports budget deficits. But we also have a new area of borrowing in the international markets, what we call commercial debts. Now, among all those potential areas that can give what we call debts, they are what we call more riskier debts. Commercial debts internationally tend to be riskier because you are talking of what we call voucher funds. They are the ones that have bankrupted a place like Argentina. The problems you're having in Greece, they are all because of that. We also have what we call, what is the recommended level of borrowing. IMF and World Bank have come up with a formula, which is they advise countries to borrow up to 150% of their total exports, or alternatively, 250% of their national revenues. So Kenya, for the last data that I have, which I think is 2017 or 2018, our national revenues were about, let's say, 2 trillion Kenya shillings. So when you apply that matrix of about 250 of that, then it means about 5 to 6 trillion borrowing is okay. Now, what about our exports? Yes, our exports were about, let's say, 1 trillion. So maybe if you were to use that matrix, we ought to have borrowed a little bit of less. For me, if you were to ask me, what is the best way of borrowing, taking all that into consideration? For me, borrowing from what we call multilateral lenders, let's say like World Bank, or even bilateral lenders like China, that is fairer because you're talking of sovereign debts, other countries, which you can negotiate concessionary rates. But borrowing domestically, particularly what we call short-term debts, that is treasury bills, that tends to have very negative effects on a country, which means, number one, most banks, because they're the ones which have money, they will stop lending to the common mwananchi, they will start lending to the government. As a result, there will be no private sector growth because without finance from the banks, private sector will not grow. For me, borrow, but let us not borrow domestically. But even if we have to borrow domestically, let us issue more bonds as opposed to bills so that they have longer maturity period. And most banks, they don't prefer bonds. They prefer bills.
All right, and just a reminder that the phone lines are open. We'd like to hear what your concerns are, what the issue is that you might be thinking would be presented by this debt ceiling being increased. So the phone lines are open. They'll be indicated on your screen, the number to call, and we'll take your calls as we go along. But let me come to you, Nahashon. Your opening remarks on whether Kenya is going in the right direction in terms of borrowing when we look at what's happening. And let me just quote on page 7 of the Standard today, layoffs, immoral, senators say in push for answers. And I'll just give some of the figures, and I know you handled this on the newspaper review. You have companies like the East African Portland that has laid off 200 employees. You have Kenya Airways laying off 38. You have Finlay Flowers, Kericho, where 1,700 workers lost, and the list continues. There are many more. The truth of the matter is we're not doing well as an economy. Is borrowing the direction to go?
Let's say you have you borrow 1,000 shillings from a bank. You will pay 1,500 definitely plus interest. Now, where will you get these
the extra
500 shillings to pay? Because that now is more of, you have a deficit. That money you will get by getting it from another source. But for the government now, it will have to tax more other people. other companies. That's why we are talking of companies in the private sector laying off. So the moment they are now unable to tax more, they are unable to meet their basics, their day-to-day operation, they will have now to downsize. Now that one now is what leads to this issue where we are saying, I lost my job, all that, and closing shop. So the government, in terms of borrowing is not bad, but you need to borrow and take this borrowing to the productive sector, produce more, make sure that the production is improved, other than borrowing to pay salaries. So the moment we need to have a policy that takes care of the industry, like an industrialization policy, that spells out for us to operate, for us now to bridge this gap. Because we borrow, and then again, we need now, we go, because every month the people now, as Senator Irungu Kangata said, now how will we now take care of the security? Because we need to pay them. If we don't pay them, we are now going.
So do you think that the direction the government is taking by borrowing is a good one? We'll come to the point what that money is actually being allocated to, but do you think it's a good direction from an economist point of view?
It's not good.
It's not good.
It's not
All right, Honorable Didmas Baraza.
I will talk about what we did last week as Parliament. This government had a lot of commercial debts that whose interest was very, very, very high. So what we did as Parliament is to approve so that they can borrow to pay at a cheaper rate. Borrow from these very friendly countries and pay off the debts that the commercial debts that we have in this country, so that now we can be able to move forward. But this debt is not a good thing to do. And also, if you look at the whole scenario in terms of the crumbling economy of this country, the economy is crumbling not because we have too much debt, but the economy is crumbling because this country, the people who are doing business are not more than 10. No, we are creating a Karl Marx kind of a country, a capitalist, where the state resources are controlled by a few individuals, very few individuals. So as a country, we need to have bold statements in terms of who are these people that are doing business with the government, this very huge business in the government, and where they are also investing, where are they investing this money? Because they seem to have developed an appetite of doing business. They have interest in all sectors, in the banking sectors, in the hotel industry, in transport, in logistics. So I think if this trend continues the way it is now, Kenya is going to be the poorest country, despite the fact that we have a very rich people in terms of how much we are giving to the Kenya Revenue Authority, how much our budget is, how much money is coming in through even as debts. But this money at the end of the day is getting into the pockets of
now, the question
more than 10
that many Kenyans would have is that you as a member of parliament are there to represent us. Why approve the debt ceiling when you know that there are all these anomalies and all these challenges that we have as a country, that this money may come in, but is not going to go into the right use? Because like you say, when it is controlled by very few individuals, chances are it is them who will decide where that money goes, and it may not even be reinvested in the country.
CS Treasury appeared before Parliament in the Committee of Delegated Legislations, and this is what he said. He said, of course, that is contained in the report that the Departmental Committee on Legislative, tabled before the House. And this is what the CS Treasury said, that we have this amount of debts, commercial debts. This is the much we are paying as interest. But we can get this loan at this very cheap rate, pay off
the expensive debt.
The expensive debts is just a matter of if a Kenyan goes to get a loan from Barclays Bank, for example, and you are charged an interest of 15% per annum for the next 10 years, and you are told you have Bunge Sacco here that can give you the same amount of money at the interest rate of 5%. So at the end of the day, you see there's some economic sense. So that's why Parliament approved that was brought before the House last week. Yeah.
Okay, Honorable Kangata, it sounds very logical, and it is true that getting that debt, particularly to pay off the more expensive commercial loans, would make sense. Are there policies and stringent measures in place to ensure that that's exactly what happens?
First, there is an office that has been established by the Public Management Finance Act, which deals with debt issues. That office is the one that is charged with ensuring that you don't enter into problems. There's also a report on our debt levels that is usually tabled before the National Assembly, and therefore National Assembly ought to interrogate government and ensure they don't overborrow. Also, Parliament, as the budget-making entity, the National Assembly, by the way, not Senate, the National Assembly has tools and mechanisms to ensure government does not overborrow. How? One, it can, for instance, during budget making, reduce government expenditure. Remember, whatever is borrowed, bottom line goes to pay for some expenses. Of course, also, international pressure. This government has a lot of relationship with experts from IMF and World Bank, who should also be telling them how to borrow prudently. Of course, there has been some people who have been saying, no, Japan is indebted to 250% of its GDP. USA, 100%. Countries like UK and let's say Germany, 80% of their GDP. Even the so-called European convergence rate of good borrowing is at 60% of their GDP. So there have been arguments that you have to borrow for you to become rich. The problem with that is that Kenyans has fundamental problems in terms of our exporting industry is quite not strong. And therefore, you are borrowing against what? You don't have enough assets against which you can borrow. Also, when you look at our fiscal policies, our fiscal plans, they appear not probably to support such long-term borrowing against the assets that we have as a country. So for me, yes, there exist institutions, but maybe I would want a more wiser and a better manager in the what we call fiscal policy of this country.
Okay. Honorable Didmas Baraza, some of these countries that we are quoting that have a very high percentage of borrowing ceiling as compared to their GDP, like the US, have a good credit score. Kenya, unfortunately, does not have a very good credit score. So it would sound logical that we should not borrow anymore. As much as, yes, we're paying off the commercial loans, expensive commercial loans, but we shouldn't borrow more until we improve our credit score. And how do we do that? First of all, ensure areas like manufacturing are more affordable for industry so that we have more, in the economy. Secondly, agriculture.
Can I intervene on that? Before he answers, you have said Kenya does not have a good credit score. It is not true. Standard & Poor, which is one of the main key rating agencies, has ranked Kenya as a B+, which shows that we have a good credit score. Even Modi, which is also another internationally acclaimed rating agency, it does view Kenya as a B+. But I'm not saying we are completely 100% good. No, we need to check, but it's not strictly true that we have a bad
Honorable Baraza.
Kenyans will not have a problem whether we are overborrowed or not, if this money that is coming in is going to be put into rightful use. Kenyans will be a happy people if we are borrowing to invest in the dwindling health care of this country. We'll have no problem at all. But if we are borrowing money into this country, this money goes to fund projects that are not even viable. Projects that are designed to get some individuals' money. You know, it's only in Kenya where you sit down as government officers and you decide how much money you need this financial year, and you find out how you're going to get this money. Then you fabricate a project that let us do this ABCD, so that you know that this project will cost this amount of money, but you even put the amount of money on top that you want this money to go into your pocket, and then you implement. Then once the project has been finished, you see that you have even gotten more than a half of the money that has been used to, that will have been used to implement that particular project, but just going for your own personal benefits. So that's the problem.
Okay.
And secondly, the big problem that we face as a country is, I know Parliament has the constitutional mandate to roll out the budget process in terms of deciding how much money the government gets. Approving the project the government is going to do it. But what we need to do? We need to have a system where first the government appears before Parliament to explain how they have spent the money allocated to them in the previous financial years.
Absolutely.
And then if you are not satisfied, our approval on this year's budget should be dependent on how the government utilized the previous budget. Absolutely. I will tell you, for example, in the Ministry of, for example, if we have a particular ministry where through the Auditor General's report we are told we have lost 4 billion, yet the functions of that particular ministry never crumbled. Then what does that mean? It means that even if you reduce the amount of money that this ministry is asking from Parliament, by that money which was lost, the ministry will survive.
All right, and I want us to take a few calls, and just a reminder to all our viewers that our phone lines are now open. If you'd like to participate, maybe you have a question, maybe you have on political point, we give you an opportunity to do that. So I'll hand over now to Trix to take the calls that we have so far. Trix.
Absolutely. And we would like to know what you think. And the question you're asking you across board on social media is, do you think the increased government borrowing limit is justified? I'm at Trix Ingado on Twitter, and you can also find me on Facebook, Trix Ingado across board. Tell me what you think, and I'll be sampling your views as the show goes on. So far, your comments are coming in and we have a caller who would like to weigh in on this particular issue, and that is Frederick Omari from Mombasa. Do you think the increased government borrowing limit is justified? Tell us your take. Frederick, can you hear me? All right, then on Facebook, we've lost Frederick, but we're going to go ahead with your feedback. We have Douglas Buluku, who said, it is not justified. Why can't we live within our means? And then we have David Sikoa, who says, it's not justified at all, following the conversation. Thank you for staying tuned. And then we have Malone Lampard Mwarua, who says, not at all. We've become international beggars. When are we going to lend to others? So he's wondering when our economy will grow so much that we would be able to be the lenders rather than the forever borrowing from international organizations. And on Twitter, we also have more feedback. We have Nico Keo saying, and also, why not looting from the sector's coffers? Then we have Jimmy Gaki, who said, I bet their credit score is good to borrow, and then call for an international prayer breakfast, which runs for 2 hours and costs approximately 100 million shillings. They pray and rebuke corruption, give homely speeches. Sadly, that's the trend till Jesus returns. Back to you, Mike.
I think we have a call from Frederick. Frederick, to your comment or question.
Hello.
Yes, Frederick.
Hello?
Yes, Frederick, go right ahead.
Hello?
Frederick?
Hello?
Yes, go to your question or comment. All right,
Hello?
we seem to be having a problem with that particular call, but once the calls come through and we sort that out, we certainly will be taking your calls. Let me come to you, Nahashon. And there is that question of us getting to a point where Kenya is on the verge of debt distress. This would basically mean that we are biting more than we can chew. Do you agree that we are getting there? According to World Bank, they have rated us, if we continue with the appetite that we have, we're likely to get to a point where we are on the verge of debt distress.
Yeah, the appetite is wanting. And now, what is the way forward? Because now, if that appetite for borrowing is growing, what do we do to actually cater for our domestic expenses? So there is a need for policy on tax, because there is a lot of tax lapse. Because there are very many places where some people are evading tax. And if that loophole is, first of all, closed, we'll be able to raise some amount that will make us lose the appetite to borrow. Because if we go that way, as the World Bank says, we are in a verge of actually now becoming, going to the Greece or Argentina way, where we cannot actually take care of our domestic. We cannot pay salaries, we cannot take, because we can't be talking of the Agenda 4, like agriculture, manufacturing, health center. It's only maybe manufacturing that can bring out money from the economy. But, and agriculture and manufacturing. But something like health sector is the consumer, because people need to have affordable health care at a lower cost, which is, again, taking part of the cash or the money from the coffer that we have taxed from the industry. Now, if we have a good, we make sure that nobody is evading tax, because if there is a bill about that I saw a member of parliament proposing, whereby whatever you declare should be the truth, and you can be held accountable to that, so that I am not building a palatial hall over 60 million, driving the top of the range car, but I declare and maybe 1 million tax return that I have earned. So if we breach that gap, everybody be sincere, pay tax, give Caesar to what belongs to Caesar. First, we are on the right direction.
Okay. Honorable Baraza, the question of us getting to a point where we'll tip over, where we cannot now service that debt, because then ideally would be selling our country out.
You know, we have a catch-22 situation that can only be solved by Parliament. The role of Parliament in budget making is portrayed to be huge, but on ground is very, very minimal. Because Parliament receives development proposals from government and how they are going to fund it. And by the time you are receiving these development proposals, you have within a particular limit to make a decision. Beyond that particular limit, they are deemed to be ripe for tabling. I mean, you get my point. So I would want to see a scenario where we have a particular law that will guide the executive in coming up with the budget estimates, in coming up with the projects that are supposed to be funded. And because a human being, when we were in primary school, we were being told that human beings, there are three basic needs. There are three basic needs: food, clothing, shelter, and maybe health. So we can first exhaust these three things first. I don't see the rationale where that we have parts of this country where people doesn't have water, and then we are doing some development that falls in the category of luxuries. You get the point? So we must first, in countries like America and the UK, the government first provided for the basic human needs. People have electricity, everybody has water, people have access to water, they have access to education. Once you have those kind of things, then you begin even to tax the rich and pay the poor. But if we, as a country, will begin to, if you ask me, for example, from where I sit, where if we need a SGR, I will say you no. If we need these superhighways, these interchanges, I will say no. We only need good roads, and the good roads are not necessarily highways, as long as they are passable.
Okay, let me take a call and hear what they have to say out there. So we'll take a call right now, and remember, you're welcome to call and give your comments or questions that you may have to the panel. Good morning to your question or comment.
Hello.
Yes, good morning.
Yes, morning. My name is Pascal Luke. I'm calling within Nairobi. I would like to comment, and in this comment, I would like particularly Honorable Kangata to respond to it.
Okay.
Because the other legislator is very genuine. My comment is, since 1963, Kenya has been borrowing within the successive governments. But my reservation is very precise. Does this borrowing translate to the prudent use of the intended purpose of the borrowing, so that the life of a common Kenyan can grow? That is my precise comment.
All right,
so, Honorable Kangata, I would like you to respond on this as a legislator, honestly, without applying any kind of hypocrisy. As Kenyan, we don't have a problem of borrowing. Even if the Jubilee government likes to borrow heaven and earth, we don't have a problem on it. But actually, does it go? I mean, will the borrowing really translate to the prudent use of the intended purpose? That is our only reservation. Because we are very tired of the government investing on dams and other projects which actually will go to the individual pockets. That is my own question. I'm a very angry Kenyan this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pascal. And a very angry Pascal, their question to the legislators. We have two of them here, so I'll throw this to you, Irongo Kangata. It has been asked to you. Since 1963, according to Pascal, we have been borrowing, but that does not necessarily translate to the Kenyan feeling the impact positively on the economy.
Let me say there has been good occasions of positive borrowing. There has been negative occasions of bad borrowing. Let me start with the positive ones. Currently, Kenya is about 60-65% of rate of the issue concerning electrification of our regions. Yes, the last month. That's a positive thing. Compare that to our regional peers like Tanzania and Uganda. They are currently at about 30%, 40%. That has been achieved for the last 7 years of Jubilee government since 2013. It has been aided by borrowing.
But allow me to pause you there, Irongo Kangata, because what Kenyans sometimes feel is that some of the projects that the government takes are very elitist. And I'll give you an example on what you're talking about. What is the point of having electricity in a house that is made of mud and you have no food?
Well, let me tell you the connection. Let me tell you the connection. Number one, children will read more at night as compared to just reading during the day when they're in school. Of course, education is key. Without education, no, you can't progress.
And that's the point.
Let me finish. Rural economies, let's say like trading centers, you are going to create jobs. As a result, you have seen situation where let's say your rural shopping center. Now people can establish welding, they can do kinyuzis. The local economy is at the grassroots level is waking up. That's a fact. I have seen also a situation where roads, how many new roads have been tarmacked by the government as a result of borrowing? Those roads are opening up rural economies, grassroots economy. That's positive. But let me also admit what the insinuation by the caller, there has been some negative borrowing. One of the most negative borrowing, in my own opinion, which I don't support at all, is the decision to go and borrow what we call a Eurobond, which is a commercial debt from some commercial players in New York. The problem with that borrowing is because there are two forms of borrowing. One, a borrowing that is denominated by foreign currency, and a borrowing that is based on local currency. The problem with a debt that is denominated by foreign currency is that you will have to convert local revenues into foreign currency, and where the currency which you have denominated that borrowing has strengthened, like the US dollar has done for the recent period, then you are going to experience what we call exchange losses. So the problem I had with that borrowing is because of that, the potential negative effects of that one.
Okay.
And also it was not developmental, it was put into what we call budgetary support, which in my own opinion, government ought to have resorted to IMF as opposed to go to get that money from voucher funding.
All right,
so I agree to that, that was negative.
Okay.
But there has been positive borrowing.
Positive and negative. I want us to take a call from Raphael. Tricks?
We have a call from Raphael Kiole, who's coming to us from Machakos County. He'd like to weigh in on this conversation. The question you're asking you today, do you think the increased government borrowing limit is justified? What's your opinion, Pascal, this morning?
I don't think the government is justified in borrowing. Because, hello?
Yes, carry on.
I don't think the government is justified in borrowing because every time they are borrowing money and they cannot account for what has the money done the economy of Kenya. The ordinary Kenyan is suffering. And the government is turning a blind eye on what is the priorities for Kenyans. So I would hand on what just Baraza said. We have no need for modern roads when the common man is suffering.
Right. Thank you. Your sentiments are that you want to see the monies trickling down to the common Mwananchi.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very great point right there. And of course, your comments keep on coming in via Twitter and Facebook. And the last we have Jimmy Gakio, who says, where are the likes of Anktad Kitui? And when the government literally kills agriculture and manufacturing and then turns on its jobless and other few hardworking citizens to repay the debts through heavy taxation, this much borrowing is expected. So he feels that the fact that manufacturing and agriculture is dying is the reason why we are having the problems that we are having right now in the economy. Just a reminder, the question is, do you think the increase in government borrowing limit is justified? Get on Twitter, Facebook, and we'll be sampling your views as the show goes on. Back to you, Mike.
All right, thank you, and keep them coming. And let's interrogate some of the proposals and what this funding is likely to go through. Honorable Baraza, we have, for example, 26.8 billion towards Thwake Dam, completion of Thwake Dam. And of course, right now, dams are not a very popular thing in Kenya, given that we've had issues with them. Phase 3, last mile connectivity, there's 10 billion that is set aside for that. That's what Irungu Kangata is referring to. Affordable housing may get 25 billion once we increase this debt ceiling. Upgrade of Kenol Marua Road with a tune of 33 billion. Now, it is not to say that these projects are not good projects, are not projects that we are likely to feel the effects with time, but are they a priority? Question might be, why not put this money towards, for example, the agriculture sector? We have so much arable land, whereas Kenyan coffee and Kenyan tea right now is not doing very well for the farmer. Why not put it towards things like that that would build our export capital?
I want to agree with you. It seems that we have people in government who don't understand what Kenyans need, who do not understand what it takes to improve the life of the Kenyan people. Because why would you want to go and build a dam so that it can promote irrigation where we are part of this country that are experiencing natural rains, the natural climatic conditions that are favorable for agriculture, like in Rift Valley in Western Kenya, where we have natural climatic conditions that will support agriculture, but farmers have nowhere to sell their maize. The cane farmers have had their own factories collapsing. The sugar belt is collapsing and the crunching. I think what we need to do as a country is to go back to the basics. What does a Kenyan need to live a decent life? And what is it that we can do to improve the life of Kenyan people? And we should take a stock for the last 15 years, from the time Kibaki took over power, and do an audit. Look at the amount of money that the government is injecting in the economy of this country in terms of budgets, and look at what are the government efforts to improve the life of the Kenyan people, and make a conclusion whether the lives of the Kenyan people is improving or is deteriorating. Is the manufacturing increasing or is crunching? Is the health care improving or is deteriorating? Then we can reset back to the factory settings. If at all the government intervention in the last 10 years is like what we call in English misguided missile on a wrong target. Because the principal role of government, we only have one principal role of government, is to collect resources and improve the life of the Kenyan people.
Nahashon, Honorable Baraza brings in an interesting point here to remember. During Kibaki's time, we did much less borrowing, yet we got to a point where Kenya was almost self-sufficient in terms of us being able to manage our projects from our own money. Where have we gone wrong, given that now we are borrowing more? It seems like the taxman is not able to collect as much as they were collecting then. He forever misses his targets, and it just seems we are, snowballing in the wrong direction.
I think the issue of when we prioritize the SGR, and it was a capital actually endeavor, which is actually costly. So during the Kibaki time, I think most of the...
To call a spade, sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
It was more costly, almost twice the amount it should be, which again brings us to the question of corruption.
Yeah, because the railway was actually, the cost was too much. So the difference between the Kibaki regime and the regime where we are now was that there was that cost efficiency. because we borrow very expensive loans that, when we talk of repaying now, is actually the pain. The pain we are suffering now, or we are transferring to the common wananchi, is actually too much, is a heavy burden. So there was prudence and during the Kibaki regime, and borrowing was actually, it was not actually, whatever we were repaying back was not actually as we are now. So the cost was not actually being felt like now. So we need to, the economic perspective of Kibaki was actually prudent, and we are now seeing the difference.
The difference.
Yeah.
Right. Honorable Baraza, we are out of time. I'll need your closing remarks. What do you see as the way forward for Kenya, given that the debt ceiling, as we speak, has already been increased to 9 trillion? So that is money that is likely to be borrowed, and we have prospective places we can get that money: African Development Bank, from China, from World Bank, French Development Agency, South Korea. Those are areas that we might be looking to get that money. What is your thoughts on the way forward and how we can cushion this so that the Kenyan can afford a meal?
My way forward is that we have the very basic sectors that are very key into improving the lives of the Kenyan people: manufacturing, agriculture, healthcare. And I want to see a scenario where going forward into the future, cabinet secretaries are hired on the basis of meeting specific goals. If it's in agriculture, we would want to see scenarios where you are told you have to revive Nzoia sugar, you have to revive Mumia sugar, you have to ensure that the agricultural economic activity is much more profitable. And at the end of the day, if they are not delivering within a year or 2 years, they should be shown the door. We should not entertain this English, this fat English, these things that are not yielding fruits for the Kenyans. Kenyans need their lives to be improved. We need more jobs created. We need to make healthcare more affordable. And we also need to have a system that will reduce the death rates in this country. Very many people are dying, and there is a responsibility of government through the Ministry of Health, because they are in charge of both the medical services and public health, to ensure that we reduce the deaths that are happening in this country.
All right, Honorable Irungu Kangata, your closing remarks on the debt ceiling.
Yes, personally, even as we try to blame the executive, the principal player who should be blamed by Kenyans, in my own opinion, with this problem of debt is the National Assembly. The Committee of Budget that is led by my friend MP for Kikuyu, that is Mheshimiwa Ishongwa, Mr. Duale, because National Assembly has become such an important organ in budget making. For instance, we are borrowing because we have what we call 6.7% budget deficit. It is them who came up with a budget that has a huge deficit. It is them who should be leading this country to do what we call an austerity budget. We reduce expenditure. We ensure we cut government expenditure. We look also. National Assembly, particularly this assembly and the last one, they have been coming up with legislations creating several government institutions. Every legislation is creating a government office, What is the impact of that? They are continuing to make the wage bill to balloon. So if they were prudent in legislation, National Assembly, they will be reducing. They will be ensuring no new legislation is coming to create government bureaucracy. And what is now the impact on that on counties? The effect of all that imprudence in enlarging government at the top heavy level is that there will be fewer money that is going to be devolved, which is unfair because it is not the counties which are borrowing. It is what we call the national government that has been borrowing, being underpinned by the National Assembly, which is failing to check on government expenditure.
All right, and allow me to call that a day. It's now 8 o'clock. Thank you very much.